The proposal to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow for the expropriation of land without compensation is a great cause for concern. According to a study conducted by Free Market Foundation, the proposal is already doing damage to the economy. The study found that even if the Constitution were to be amended, government will not hand over land to the needy, but possibly keep it for themselves. Let's unpack this study further with Martin Van Staden from the Free Market Foundation, who joins us from Pretoria. Martin, good morning to you. Tell us more about your findings.
Good morning. Yeah, so the Free Market Foundation has been warning South Africa against the EWC proposal since it has been adopted by Parliament as official policy in February 2019. And since then, we've seen quite predictably, in fact, what would happen in the economy with this threat hanging over it. Commercial farmers are reporting that they've stopped investing in their farms. They're no longer buying new implements. They're no longer upgrading their facilities, and that makes perfect sense. If the government essentially has said we're going to take your property without paying for it, then that follows. We've seen something similar in 2018, at least in the affordable housing market, where demand for low-cost homes fell somewhat, and people in that industry attributed this to the government's promise, or in fact, it's an implied promise that land will be seized and then it will be dished out to the poor. But as we've seen with this government's past conduct, about a year ago, there was a report that the government was still sitting on 4,000 farms that it had expropriated for land reform purposes, which it had not given to beneficiaries. We also see very often that when government does hand over land, so-called, it in fact only leases it out to beneficiaries rather than transferring it in ownership. So it's quite clear that there will be no transfer of property in South Africa following EWC in ownership, but in fact it will be a very state-centric arrangement, which will be deleterious for the economy. That's why we recommend that private property rights be respected, and that, of course, restitution of land must happen, and it has been happening since apartheid ended. That must continue apace. But the constitutional protection for private property must not be undermined in this manner.
Tell us more about your findings of government agenda. You did touch on it, but there's also concern that obviously they will try and lease it out or give it to their friends.
Yes. Yeah, so we've seen this in other places where expropriation without compensation has been tried. Most prominently in our own context is in Zimbabwe, where the land reform program was embarked upon specifically for President Mugabe to satisfy the demands of his political allies, who he could no longer pay in money, so he started paying them in land, which he seized from productive farmers. We've seen this more recently in Venezuela, where the programs of Hugo Chavez and Maduro have led to political allies receiving handouts rather than the Venezuelan people themselves. And of course, we've seen this in South Africa. There have been instances where we've seen highly connected political officials suddenly becoming farmers. Quite an interesting turn of events. As I mentioned, the government has this tendency to hang on to the land that it expropriates from otherwise productive private citizens and then lease it out. And there's no real way for civil society to control who it benefits. Government might say that previously disadvantaged people will benefit, but we've also seen this with other government policies that are framed in a similar way, where politically connected individuals who unfortunately qualify as previously disadvantaged under our law receive the benefits. We've seen this. It's quite predictable that it will happen again.
So let me just jump in here quickly, Martin. What is the better way then to protect property rights and to deal with this land issue? Were you able to get any sort of more positive conclusions?
Absolutely. If the government abandons expropriation without compensation and leaves the Constitution intact, that would be a far more positive conclusion, because the Constitution already provides very handsomely for land reform. Government already has a positive obligation to restitute land dispossessed during apartheid to those from whom it was taken. Government has a positive obligation to secure the tenure of those who had insecure tenure in the past, and that means government must hand out title deeds to properties in former apartheid townships. That is something government has been very lax in, and our recommendation is for government to enforce the Constitution as it currently stands, which is a very powerful thing, rather than undermining the protection for property rights and really harming South Africa's economy in a similar way, if not a worse way, than the COVID-19 lockdown already has.
Thank you for sharing your findings with us, Martin Van Staden.